Biodiversity, Introduction to Taxonomy. So before we start, we should probably understand what is biodiversity. So biodiversity is the variety of life in our world. It's the product of millions of years of evolution. So when animals evolve, plants evolve, bacteria evolve, those all contribute to what is known as biodiversity. So why is this important? Well, ecosystems with a high biodiversity tend to be a little bit more healthier and more resilient to environmental changes to those who don't have a high biodiversity. So ecosystems with a high variation of species will tend to be more healthy. So if we break it down, we get 3 levels of biodiversity: genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. So genetic diversity is the sum of different forms of genes present in a particular species. So there's 2 very important words here, genes and species. Genes we'll focus on a little bit more later, but species is a population whose members can breed freely in nature and produce fertile offspring. So the fact that they can produce fertile offspring is very important to it being a species. Next is species diversity. It's the variety of species and relative abundance of that species in a given area. Then lastly, we have ecosystem diversity, which is diverse range of habitats, the various organisms that live in those habitats, and the relationships that connect them. So if we want to learn a little bit more about the history of where taxonomy came from, we can go all the way back millions of years ago to when the first time organisms were defined was by Aristotle, the famous philosopher and scientist Aristotle. The term species was first used by John Ray in the 17th century to describe an organism. His list of species grew so much, and that today we are still discovering new species. And lastly, Carolus Linus discovered modern taxonomy using a system known as the binomial nomenclature. So if I were to give you a red oak tree, the scientific name for this, and most species, if not all species, do have a scientific name, is Quercus rubera. So this part, the quercus, tells us that this is an oak tree. So all oak trees will have quercus before them. But what makes this one special, because it's a red oak tree, is that it has the word rubera there. So that tells us that it's a red oak tree. So now looking a little bit into detail about how I just classified that red oak tree is taxonomy. And this is the science of naming organisms using groups or taxa, and each level is deemed as a taxon. So now here's a little bit more into the classification chart that you will see more in biology. So we start off with domain, which is the highest level that you can have, and it's a giant umbrella of different types of things. And then we go into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and finally the lowest is species. And there's a bunch of little subcategories in here that you can even break it down into little micro things, but these are the main ones that we'll be focusing on. And there are so many different domains and kingdoms and phylums specifically that we will look at in this series. And if I wanted to, I could give you the genus for humans, which is Homo. And there are so many different types of Homo, but which one are we? Our species as humans are Homo sapiens. So we would write it like that.
And the last thing that we're going to be looking at is a dichotomous key. So what a dichotomous key is it helps us organize different things into different sections or into groups. So right here I have a list of 6 cupcakes. Now if you were given this on a test or something else, it would probably be different species that you would have to classify into groups based on what color they are, what size they are, if they had arms or legs or wings, stuff like that. But we are going to do it with cupcakes right now to make it simple. So obviously you would start off calling this group cupcakes because we know that they are all in fact cupcakes. But how can we break them down further? Well, the simplest thing to do, for me at least, would be to break it down into chocolate and vanilla, because I know that's a clear difference between the two. So I can go ahead and write chocolate and vanilla. So now we can start off with our chocolate. We can look at our chocolate cupcakes and see what we obviously have 3 of them, but we need to differentiate them all the way down to the last detail. Well, I can see that I have 2 with colored icing and 1 with plain icing, so I can do that. So I can write colored icing and plain icing. So we can look at our colored ones, and we have to break them down all the way until there's only 1 left. So we know we have 1 with blue icing and 1 with pink icing. So we can go ahead and write that into our chart too. Blue and pink. So now we can write their final name. The only one that is chocolate, has colored icing, and is blue is Rainbow Chip. And the only one that is chocolate, colored icing, and pink is Superberry. And then lastly, our only one that is chocolate and has plain icing is Choco Chip. So now we've classified all of the chocolate ones. So now we can move on to the vanilla. Again, with the vanilla, I see that 2 of them have icing and 1 of them doesn't. That seems like the easiest way to go. So I'm gonna make 1 with icing and 1 with no icing. And now we can break it down into, we can look at which ones are vanilla, and then we see that 2 of them have icing. How can we differentiate those 2? Well, I see that only 1 of them has sprinkles. So I'm gonna do sprinkles and no sprinkles. So now we can go ahead and write their names. The only one that is vanilla, has icing, and has sprinkles is Queen Sprinkles. And the only one that is vanilla, has icing, but has no sprinkles is Plain Swirl. And our last one is vanilla, no icing. The only one that is like that is Muffin. So now you have classified each and every one of these, and you are able to know which one of these cupcakes has which one of these distinctive features.